Welcome to this explainer. Right now, we're diving straight into a deeply eerie digital phenomenon to uncover exactly what happens when abandoned tech captures the completely unexplainable. We're going to look at a collection of genuinely unsettling horror stories, all derived entirely from found footage. So I want you to start by just asking yourself, have you ever found an old phone, maybe a forgotten camera or a dusty memory card lying around somewhere and just wondered, what's actually on it? Look, most of the time we know it's going to be nothing special, right? It's just out of focus family photos, mundane vacation videos, or random boring recordings. But that is the terrifying exception we're focusing on today. Because sometimes a recording actually survives when the person who made it doesn't. And sometimes these abandoned devices capture things that frankly should never have been seen. Today, we're examining 7 recovered recordings that somehow survived long after their owners completely vanished into thin air. Now, whether you believe these are elaborate fakes or chilling proof of something much darker, the events we're about to unpack are literally impossible to forget.
Okay, let's get into section 1, Terrors in the Wild. Isolation as the threat.
So imagine this. We have a timeline reconstructed from a broken smartphone that was found near an abandoned highway out in Arizona. The final recovered video shows a young woman walking through the desert at sunset because her car broke down. Notice the grueling psychological horror here. At the 1 hour mark, a man appears in the distance, just watching. By hour 4, after she's been walking endlessly, the figure hasn't moved a muscle. He remains the exact same distance away. Then the sun disappears. Suddenly, at the 5 hour mark, the figure is so much closer. Obviously, she panics and runs, and the camera is shaking violently in her hand. And then, a split second later, she turns around, and the figure is standing directly behind her. The video just ends right there. In search teams, they never found her. We see a very similar escalation of absolute dread on a dashcam recovered from a wrecked vehicle at the bottom of a mountain cliff. The driver is totally alone at night, pouring rain. First, he notices these headlights behind him matching his speed perfectly for an entire hour. They never get closer, they never fall behind. Obviously uneasy, he pulls over, steps out of the car, and finds the road is completely empty. No vehicles, no headlights, nothing. Confused, and honestly, who wouldn't be, he gets back in, he looks into the rearview mirror, and sees someone sitting right in his back seat. The dashcam captures his terrified scream right before cutting out completely. Our third wilderness case is a bit different. It involves an auditory anomaly. This footage was recovered from an abandoned campsite up in Washington state, left behind by 3 friends who just vanished. Around midnight, the camera captures them telling ghost stories around the fire when suddenly they hear a whistle from deep inside the forest. But here's the thing, it was an identical whistle every single time. I mean, the exact same pitch, the exact same length. It sounded almost mechanical, like a recording replaying out there in the pitch black woods. And it gets closer, eventually echoing directly from inside the campsite itself. A flashlight illuminates something tall and dark near the fire for a split second, and then just nothing. So we've clearly seen how isolation in nature leaves you incredibly vulnerable. But what happens when the horror actually follows you inside? You know, what happens when these unexplained events invade the very places we traditionally consider completely safe? Which brings us to section 2, urban and domestic nightmares. Nowhere is safe. This next sequence comes from a final camcorder video shot by a teenage boy named Eric in a century-old Pennsylvania farmhouse. Now, Eric had been complaining about knocking on his window, which, sounds like a standard teenage scare, except his bedroom was on the 2nd floor. No ladder, no balcony, nothing. So he sets up a camera. First, we hear a tap, tap, tap coming from the glass. Eric walks up to the dark window and you can hear his shaky breathing captured perfectly on the audio. He pulls back the curtain, and right outside is a pale, smiling face standing level with that 2nd floor window. The impossible physics of this encounter make it truly, truly disturbing. And Eric?
He vanished the very next day. Next up, we have this wildly bizarre security camera archive from an office building that had been completely abandoned for months. And remember, security cameras are objective observers, which kind of makes this one even more chilling. At 2:13 a.m., an elevator opens and a frightened, really confused woman steps out. She keeps checking over her shoulder as if she's actively being hunted. She hides inside a conference room, and the heavy door closes behind her. We wait for minutes. Eventually, the door reopens, but the woman never comes out. Instead, a tall, shadow-like figure exits the room. The unexplainable facts of this woman being quite literally replaced by a shadow were never solved. Then, we see this terrifying spatial horror on a memory card that someone bought inside an old camera at a local flea market. The photos on the card were taken in an abandoned hospital. Just look at this slow, agonizing progression. In photo 1, a figure stands way down a long, crumbling hallway. In photo 2, a few minutes later, the figure is closer. By photo 10, the figure fills half the entire frame. The photographer is essentially documenting their own doom, click by click. And the final image? It's completely black, except for two pale eyes staring directly into the camera lens. The original owner of that camera was never identified. Moving on to Section 3, the echoes of audio, an invisible anomaly. Now let's listen to the chilling reality of this recovered audio tape, pulled from an old police evidence box that was actually scheduled for destruction. On it, we hear a missing investigating officer checking out an abandoned tunnel. He's calmly walking, describing the scene, acting completely normal. But then we hear what we'll call the mimic. The officer realizes that whenever he takes a step, another step echoes behind him, perfectly synchronized. When the officer stops, the second set of footsteps just continues to approach. The officer clearly gets nervous and calls for backup, but he gets zero response from dispatch. Then the recording captures this heavy, panicked breathing, and the officer whispers a terrifying realization. Something is standing behind me. There are several seconds of dead silence, and then a voice speaks on the tape, but it uses the officer's own voice. It repeats his exact words, and then the recording ends forever. That officer and his patrol car disappeared completely. 7. We've just analyzed 7 different lost recordings from totally different environments. We're talking deserts, mountains, forests, attics, office buildings, hospitals, and tunnels. And that means 7 unsolved disappearances where the absolute only witness left behind was the silent spool of an audio recorder or the unblinking eye of a camera. So the crucial point we really need to take away here is the macro view of this whole phenomenon, because the reality is terrifying. Thousands, every single year, literally thousands of memory cards, phones, and cameras are discovered without owners. Yes, obviously most of them just contain ordinary memories, lost by total accident, but some of them disappear because nobody wants them to be found. And every once in a while, someone presses play and finds something horrific waiting inside. Which brings us to a rather unsettling conclusion. The scariest part isn't just the 7 stories we cover today. It's the fact that there may still be countless lost recordings out there right now, just waiting for someone to find them. If you were to go check that dusty drawer in your house right now and power on a device you haven't touched in years, what is inside yours?